Good afternoon and welcome to today's ACPE Academy webinar. My name is Mark Medwed and I'm the Program Manager at the ACPE. Today we begin the first of 3 webinars focused on spiritual care of the non-religious presented by the Reverend Mary Martha Teal, who is the Director of Clinical Pastoral Education at Hebrew Senior Life, Hebrew Rehabilitation Center in Boston, Massachusetts. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for playback from the ACPE Academy webpage for members of ACPE. At the conclusion of the presentation today, there will be an opportunity for you to submit questions. When you move your mouse on the screen, you will see a Q&A button. Click on the button and type your question. Due to the potentially high number of questions that will be asked, please know that not all questions can be answered as part of the webinar. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Reverend Mary Martha Teal.
Hello, everyone. It really is a privilege to be with you and share with you some of the information that I have gained during the last several years of study with a pastoral grant from the Louisville Institute. So I have a great deal of appreciation for that institution. Next slide, please. So as Mark said, this is the first of a series of 3 webinars. Today I'll do sort of an overview about spiritual care of the non-religious, and part 2 will be about teaching this to our students, so very much focused on CPE supervisors. And part 3 will look at American Jews as a special situation of the non-religious. So I welcome you to any or all of these webinars. Next slide. So today I hope that we will become more familiar with those who are non-religious in this country. And I hope that you will get curious about who they are in your institution, in your setting, because it's different in every place. And that you'll have some new language to work with these people pastorally, and have a few new ideas for your toolkits as you go about doing your pastoral work. Next, please. So who are the non-religious that we're serving? I use non-religious carefully as a word, and that's why it's in quotations here. There's no good word to talk about this large conglomerate of people who are atheist, agnostic, spiritual but not religious, religiously unaffiliated, people combining practices from multiple traditions, people with no religion in particular, the so-called nuns, which we are now hearing much more about in the media. So there's no good term. I've used this term as a blanket term for these non-traditional people who are now so much more a part of the American religious landscape, and consequently much more a part of who we're serving in healthcare and other institutions. And it's important for us to know, and much of this information comes from the Pew surveys of American religion, that this is a large group that we can't make a lot of assumptions about. So 92% of this group say that they believe in God or a higher power. I was amazed when I learned that. Many of these people consider religion important. And we see that this, this group is gaining in time. In 7 years' time, the percentage of Americans who labeled themselves as Christians was reduced by about 8%. The percentage of the unaffiliated went up about 8%. And so when we see someone who's in a non-traditional identification, we need to be aware that they are much more spiritually complex than we might at first think. Next slide, please. Consequently, having humility when we approach these folks is incredibly important. It's of course important with anyone that we see, but it's especially important with this group because so many of them have been hurt by religious traditions. Some have always been non-religious. They were raised in non-religious households. But most of this group have left religious traditions. And they have done so, some of them anyway, for very good reasons. And the table of contents of a recent book lists many of these really good reasons. Sins against the earth, sins against people of color, so much part of our life right now, sins against the poor, sins against LGBTQ persons, sins against the disabled, sins against other religions. And it's not surprising that Pew has found that the LGBTQ community and Jews have a disproportionately high percentage of people who are unaffiliated. So when traditions have hurt people, then we are not surprised when they are unaffiliated, and it makes our work as chaplains extra tender because we represent tradition when we walk into the room. Next slide, please. I want to also say something about sins against atheists. This was another thing that was really a new idea for me, to learn how strong the prejudice against atheism is in the United States. This is just an example that's pretty famous. In the Boy Scouts, finally in 2014, gay Boy Scouts could join the organization. Troop leaders who were gay were allowed a year later in 2015. But even today, no atheists or agnostics are allowed to join the Boy Scouts. And that I use just as a metaphor for how strong this prejudice is against atheists. And there are 7 states in the United States that do not allow atheists to run for public office. I was astounded by that. I did not know that. And the point is for us to acknowledge the harm that our traditions have done and to recognize that some of the people that we serve will be really allergic, if you will, to the word religious, and they may also be allergic to the word spiritual because it's so close to religious for them. And so with each person, we need to approach with compassionate curiosity. Next slide, please. So these groups have huge variety, and they have their own integrity in terms of their beliefs and their behaviors and the way that they belong in a group. And some of us in CPE might even, in our honest moments, say that we might consider ourselves spiritual but not religious. When I did a workshop for UCC clergy, I was astounded how high the percentage of people in the room was who said, oh, I'm SBNR, I'm spiritual but not religious. And so chaplains must learn new languages and new practices to meet the spiritual needs of the people before us. And one of the names for that is code switching, which is a term that has come to many of us through Wendy Cadge, the sociologist of religion, where we learn a new language or set of languages to enter the world of the person that we're serving. Next slide, please. So we're going to see this slide twice today. It's how I, Mary Martha Teal, think about what our tasks are as a chaplain. And first, we want to assess the spirituality of the resident or the patient. We want to identify areas of their strength and work to build on them to increase their spiritual well-being. We also want to identify their areas of distress, work to ameliorate them to decrease their spiritual distress, using that person's language of meaning and using that person's spiritual resources. So I'm going to go through each of those things that is highlighted to say what I mean by it, and then we'll look again at that slide at the end, and hopefully it will be very clear at that point. So first of all, what is spirituality? I think of spirituality as having two themes, one being a personal quest to find meaning and purpose in life, and the other is the relational theme, by trusting and relating to something greater than oneself, which you'll see in these slides as SGTO, something greater than oneself. So meaning and a relationship to something greater than oneself. And our discipline thinks of spirituality as present in all people, from the very young to the very old, whether or not that person is comfortable with the language. Next slide, please. So what are something greater than oneself? So most people in the United States do have God on their list. Most are also going to have family on their list, and you'll see that one on the right-hand side. People in 12-step programs might talk about a higher power. Some communities might talk about luck. That's important in the Chinese tradition. It might be a country of origin or ethnicity, Israel, Ireland, Italy. Might be beauty, one's vocation. Might be science, friends, ancestors, peoplehood, pets. So you'll see on this list this huge range of things that might be something greater than oneself that helps to give relationship and meaning to someone's life. Next slide. So here's an example that I find rather amusing. This is a lanyard for an ID that says, "I am Harvard Medicine." I work in the Harvard system, and this was part of a fundraising plea for people to give money, and if they did, they could then have this for their very own, to say, "I am Harvard Medicine." And it's a way of saying how incredibly important vocation is, to identify oneself. I am Harvard Medicine. I am my work. I am Harvard. I am medicine. I am part of this thing that's larger than myself, that's worth the giving of my life to. Next slide, please. This is about the idea of business as something greater than oneself, which is a rather new idea for me. And this particular There we are. I'm not sure what happened there, but thank you for hanging in with us.
Sorry about that. We're having some internet challenges here in Atlanta because of the storms. So
okay, all right.
So good to go.
Okay, good. So there are many ways that people join together in groups to meet many of the values and virtues that have traditionally been part of religion. Next slide, please. This is a picture of books on a shelf in a hospital chapel, and you'll see over on the right-hand side the purpose-driven life, which is there along with many holy books. So you see both a collection of secular and religious books, and it's important that we be aware in the context in which we work, what are the holy books, even the secular holy books. I was on a hike some years ago, and the children in front of me were scrambling up this mountain in Maine and talking about the Harry Potter books, and that was the story of shared meaning between them. So Harry Potter may be one of the secular holy books of our generation. Next slide, please. So some more, something greater than oneself. So I work in geriatrics, so very often we hear stories about parents and grandparents and neighborhoods of one's family of origin. Artwork, sports teams. I'm from Boston. Sports is a big thing here. One's medical team often becomes a something greater than oneself. Music and the arts, and so on. Let's go to the next slide. So here is a hospital picture with a harp, and you'll see in the foreground a very young baby who is enjoying this harp music. And even with a baby who is who's deaf, harp music is sometimes used, and the child is allowed to feel the harp and feel the vibrations, and that's a source of real pleasure. So music in many ways can be one of these something greater than oneself. Next slide, please. So here's a little guy, and he's showing us several SGTOs. He's waiting for his dad, so that's the photograph of his dad on his t-shirt. Country, he's very proud with this flag, and the military. So all of those are very common SGTOs. Next slide, please. So here we have a hospital garden here in Boston, and we see family. We see two siblings who are enjoying this beautiful day, as well as the beauty of the garden. And part of why nature is so important as an SGTO is that it points to a process that continues, that is larger than ourselves, that will be there when we are gone, to which we can contribute now. So you see in the foreground here the roots of a redwood tree that is many, many, many stories tall and gives a sense of something greater than oneself. Next slide. So here we are at a Boston Red Sox game, and many patients and families will use metaphors of sports to talk about their spiritual issues around illness. And how the Red Sox and the Patriots are doing in Boston at any one time makes a huge difference in terms of the conversations that get had in hospital rooms. Next one, here we go. This is to demonstrate heroes. So here's a child meeting a rugby star in her hospital room. But adults too have heroes, and we can ask someone who's not religious, tell me about who's a hero in your life or a heroine in your life, and you'll learn something very important about their spiritual values. Next slide, please. Okay, so religion becomes much more about the organized group or community, and usually has a common authoritative text or narrative. And such a religion does not necessarily have to have a theistic position. So someone like a group like the Ethical Culture Society or some kinds of Buddhism do not have a God, and still, for our purposes, would be considered religion. So then, next slide, let's look at what is spiritual well-being. So this is what we're aiming to strengthen in our patients, and it's a life-giving connection to whatever their something greater than oneself is. And this is going to help them be in touch with their beliefs and values and community, so that their hope is sustained, a sense of wonder, resiliency, meaning, reconciliation, peacefulness. And they may express this in religious language, and they may express it in secular language, or a combination of both. Next one, spiritual distress. So this is just the opposite. So when the connection to something greater than oneself is either broken or there's a threat of it being broken, then distress happens. And it's very easy for this to happen in a hospital setting, where the very fact of being removed from one's normal place threatens that connection to a community, to a series of practices. And we know that illness often upsets people's core beliefs in how life works, life's meaning, purpose, and fairness. We do that kind of work every day. And again, this kind of spiritual distress can be expressed in secular or religious language. Next slide, please. So here's beauty to give us a little rest. Next slide. Now I put this slide here with a little bit of caution. The quote comes from Christian Wyman, who is a poet. He also has a potentially fatal disease. And he says this: the merely individual connection with the divine, the whole modern muddle of gauzy ontologies and piecemeal belief that leads so many people to dismiss all doctrine out of hand, or to say that they are spiritual but not religious. All this is fine until life or death comes crashing into you with its all too specific terrors and sufferings. Definite beliefs enable us to withstand the storms of suffering that come into every life and that tend to destroy any spiritual disposition that does not have deep roots, unquote. This he's certainly writing from his own experience. Some of us as religious people may find ourselves very much in sync with this particular pastoral concern. I think it's important for us to recognize that this may or may not be true for the particular individual who is in front of us in this moment. And it is still our job to help the person draw on the beliefs that are working for them in the face of their current situation and suffering. Next slide, please. So just a word to remind us all about our code of ethics, that we are to respect a person or group's religious conviction and avoid the imposition of theology or cultural values on those that we serve and supervise. So this is built in to our code of ethics, whether the person that we serve is secular or religious or some combination. Next slide. At Hebrew Senior Life, we use primarily two different kinds of assessment tools. Focus and should be focusing on the parts that are most important to the person, not what might be most important to us in our own tradition. So in case that wasn't on the audio, this is just to say that we need to spend the most time in the part of this map that is the most important to the patient. Okay, next slide, please. So this assessment model looks at 7 continuums, and these themes, and they have both positive and negative forms. And most of us on the team have these in our head, and it gives us a way to listen and to see where the strengths are, the resources are, as well as where areas of distress may be. Next, please. So now we come back to the original slide. So I hope it now makes sense that our job is to assess the spirituality of the resident, even though it may be very different from our own, to identify their particular strengths, even though they may be very different than our own. We want to build on those. And I just lost my... Well, we'll hope that those come back. We want to ameliorate the sources of distress and always be using the language of the person who's in front of us. Next slide. This is a picture of a window in a hospital setting, and you'll see that there's some fluffy stuffed animals in the background, and then there are three objects closer to us. A chaplain might ask, I noticed you brought some things and put them on the window. Please tell me what's on the window. And what this particular mother said was, I'm not religious, but I believe in the power of hope, in the power of determination, and in angels, guardian angels. And so this mom brought to the hospital with her, when she brought her child for care, her own, what we might call a secular altar. And so she has a symbol for those things she believes in. So the little picture of Ariel is her symbol for hope. Then there's Wonder Woman, who is the power of determination. And then the snow globe of guardian angels. And it's important for a chaplain to know this, not only because we've just been introduced to a lot about the spiritual world of this woman in front of us, but interpreting this to the staff will be very, very useful, especially when mom turns into Wonder Woman to advocate for her child. And when the staff understands that this is part of how she understands her call in the world, and that this is important to her, they can understand the advocacy with a new appreciation. So next slide, some secular spiritual resources. So in our toolkit, now we're switching to our own pastoral toolkit, things we might want to add to the religious toolkit that most of us already have a lot of comfort with. Secular spiritual resources are certainly going to include relationships with family and friends, the staff, the medical team, you as the chaplain, photos of loved ones. I work in a long-term care setting, so we get to see a lot of pictures that tell us a lot about the person's world. Memories, cooking, because we're in a long-term setting, gardening, acts of compassion. Some of our residents during times of war want to do something, and so they send greeting cards to soldiers who are abroad as a way of expressing support and compassion for people offering their lives for the country. So again, that's really in good collaboration with some of their Somethin Greater than oneself, their values in the world. Reading or being read to, whether you're a child or you're an elder, that might be really a lovely thing to do in the hospital. At end of life, chaplains might do well to learn about ethical wills, and these can be both religious or secular, and they're basically a statement that is left to loved ones about what are the values that the person wants to be remembered for and to pass on to family, to future generations, to the students that one has had in one's life, to colleagues, and so on. Next slide. Oh, good. I think we're now getting back together again. So this is a picture of a field guide to spirituality. And this comes from the Spirituality and Practice website, which if you haven't met it, you might really enjoy doing so. This is a free download and includes many, many, many spiritual practices that could be used with people who are not religious. Next slide. Some more secular spiritual resources. Team sports, of course. In our setting, people aren't so much playing them, but they're certainly watching them. And it's really fun for residents when staff watch with them particular games that they love. Having a pet visit. We have a lot of pets who visit, as well as therapy animals who visit, and those relationships bring back all kinds of sweet memories for people. And for a child in the hospital to have their own pet come is a highlight. And it's not unusual for someone to go from being nonverbal to using their voice again when a pet comes. Chaplains already know a lot about guided meditation and using music and so on. Make sure if you're using guided imagery or meditation that you're doing it with someone who is cognitively intact. You might help someone keep a journal of their time in the hospital, or a journal reflecting on important themes in their life. Life review, just sitting quietly. Hand massage, something as simple as that, makes a connection full of memories for the person. Next slide, please. Even more secular spiritual resources. Repetitive actions. So we know that most religious traditions have practices that are connected to things like praying with beads, and again, repetitive actions can be very helpful spiritually to de-escalate anxiety and so on. So if you've got somebody who's knitting, they may be actually doing a spiritual practice that is helping them to calm down, or you might be able to offer them knitting needles and yarn. iPad pastoral care is a topic of its own, worth its own webinar. The creativity that chaplains are bringing to using iPads is amazing. So some of that has to do with games and pictures and beauty and going to places that have been meaningful, looking at the various homes where you've lived by going to Google Earth, something like that. Here in geriatrics, we sometimes look up websites of people who family members, so that the elder can take part in what's going on in family. Talk about how one might close a visit without using prayer, when prayer is inappropriate. So in many pastoral visits, a visit will end with a prayer, and that prayer helps people know that they've been heard, that their story impacts you, that it won't always be the way it is today, that something greater than themselves cares about their plight. And we can do much of that without using prayer. but that in a ritual sort of way expresses the same kinds of intentions. So you'll find your own language for this, but here are some options. I will be holding you in my heart during your test tomorrow. I hope you will find a community that welcomes you and your child when you go home. I trust that it won't always feel like it does today. I wonder what doors will open for you that we haven't even imagined. This is really useful when you've gotten to a place in a pastoral visit where you yourself may be touching despair, just as a patient is. This is a way of tapping into hope for both parties. Or you may be very impressed with a virtue that a patient is using to sustain them, and you may just comment on that. May your courage continue to sustain you. So that kind of open-eyed prayer or spontaneous blessing, it's sometimes called in the literature, can be very helpful. Next slide, some spiritual religious tools. So you will want to have in your chaplaincy library music that is representative of the cultures and ages of people that you serve. Certainly scripture, beads, bells, yahrzeit candles, anniversary candles of someone's death. River stones I put on the list as something secular. So you can buy lovely soft river stones that have engraved in them a virtue like hope, trust. And that may be just the right thing for someone to hold on to during a difficult time. Qibla is the direction of prayer for Muslims, and certainly a whole variety of prayers. And I would include things that are very liturgical, as well as things that sound like everyday language. And they may be useful to you in coming up with everyday language to talk to someone who is secular. So I have always believed that it's important to let the context in which we work inform our practice. So in my particular context, Boston is one of the least religious cities in the US. Maybe one of the reasons I'm interested in this topic. Roman Catholics are the largest group, and they are often significantly disaffected because of the priest scandal. Because I work in long-term care, the residential context means that of the spiritual needs that we assess here, love and belonging is the most frequently documented need. So in our setting, although it's a plain building, there's beautiful art, and the art is both religious and secular, representing both types of people who we serve. And especially because we work, our average age of our resident here is 90. We do a lot with dog therapy. So all of those are examples of how the context informs the practice that we do. In acute care, you may have the most frequent need be something like hope or trust, and belonging might come in religious services, or in some settings some secular activities or discussion groups. In our front lobby there's a fish tank, which is another way of getting lost in something large and beautiful. So here's a something greater than oneself that many people in this country would identify with: walking on the beach. So the ocean, the sky, the clouds, all of those represent something larger than oneself. And people may gain a sense of peace by being in that location, or by being able to simply look at pictures. So now we have about 15 minutes for questions. So I have quite a few, as I look at this, that relate to the hearing, not seeing. And again, on behalf of all of us, I apologize for that. On both our ends, there were troubles today. And I guess the net was very much affected in Atlanta, where this is coming from. So I would be quite interested in questions about content. So here's one. How do you describe your role as chaplain to an SBNR person? So I might say to that person, I'm Mary Martha Teal. I'm the chaplain on this unit, and I'm the person who, on the team, who is most interested in what this illness is doing to you as a human being and how you are getting along with it. So I might open that way, both with a religious person and a non-religious person, and then I'm going to follow the language. So you want to open with a wide, which means more secular opening, and then if someone is religious, it's very easy to move into religious language. A question, do you have non-religious CPE interns? Yes, we do. As I said, Boston is one of the least religious cities in America. And we have several divinity schools and rabbinical schools here in Boston that in some ways particularly serve this population. So Harvard Divinity School considers itself an interfaith place, and many students there would say they do not believe in God at all. And there's been writing in the media about the increase in non-believers who are going to seminary these days in America. So we see it a lot here in Boston, and those of you in other parts of the country may start seeing it soon, because we certainly see it here. And when we get to the third one of these webinars, we will talk about the Jewish, the way Judaism intersects with this non-religious theme, and we will see that there are a number of people who go into the rabbinate who do not have a belief in God per se, and for whom it's perfectly appropriate and accepted by the community that they might be the rabbi. And we take such people into our program. So my students run all the way from very much believing Orthodox Jews in the Jewish scheme, all the way over to secular Jews, and then we've got UUs who may or may not be theistic, and Christians of all stripes. So we have a very diverse student body, which makes for great and interesting learning. How do we ethically, and this is a question many of us struggle with, how do we ethically and honestly minister to persons with beliefs that may be offensive to our theologies? So I think it's important to know our own limits, and to know that on rare occasions we may need to recuse ourselves from doing the pastoral care of a particular person. And then, like any other discipline, we need to make sure there's someone there to pick that up. I hope that in our discipline that will be very rare, and that through training and experience and getting to know people, we will be stretched in our capacity to feel empathy and compassion for people whose points of view may be even directly opposed to our own. And one of the joys for me about being a chaplain is that has happened to me time and again in my work over 30 years, and feels very holy to me that I get to meet and work with people so different from myself. Let's see. Here's a question. Is spirituality cared for when a chaplain helps the resident identify and deal with their emotions? It may or may not be, depending on the particular person. And that's why it's so important to know what some of the something greater than oneself are for the person in front of you. So I am not someone who would ever say that just dealing with feelings is adequately taking care of one's spirituality. So the point is to have enough assessment tools in your toolkit that you can confidently know that you are working with the spirituality of someone, whether or not that's what they would call it. Let's see. What is your own spiritual or religious self-identification? Great question. So I'm a United Church of Christ minister, born and raised UCC, which is a little bit unusual. Most UCC clergy come from other denominations. I come from the congregational branch. Do I in some way identify with the non-religious? Or do I consider myself traditionally religious who simply needs to develop cultural humility for those who are not? So I would say yes, in some ways I do identify with the non-religious because of what has happened to the word religious in our common culture. So in some ways the context makes a big difference here. Anyone looking from the outside at my life would very much say I'm a religious person. It's the way I organize my life and my week and my work and my vocation, and I'm very active in a local church and in the volunteering kinds of things that I do. So in some ways I'm very religious. In other ways I'm shy of some of the language that is used in this country very differently than I would use that language, that religious language. And so, so I do in some ways identify with the people who would say, oh, I'm spiritual but not religious. So I think I'm a good example of somebody who's much more complicated than might first be assumed in meeting me. So I hope that helps. Let's see here. So what I hear you saying is that the social, secular side of someone's life may in fact be their spiritual, non-religious side of life, and that is what brings meaning and purpose in their life. And as a spiritual religious chaplain, it would be inappropriate to move from the secular and just be present. I'm not sure that I would say that it would be inappropriate to move from the secular and just be present. I think it's, if we're doing our work well, we are present to people, and we have to listen really well so that we know to whom we are being present and how best to be present. To not engage with the things that provide purpose in someone else's life, that I don't think is very helpful to them in terms of their spiritual care. Okay, let's see. Do you know of any tool that can effectively be used for chaplaincy with people that are incarcerated? I'm not sure what the when you're asking about tools, I don't know. I have never worked in prison ministry, and so I don't know much about that work. I would think that many of the themes that we talked about today might be very useful. So the use of what are things that are important to you now, what gives you hope now, where do you find strength to get through this time now? All of that might be very, very helpful to work with someone who's incarcerated and secular. And if somebody were religious, then it's more straightforward what kinds of tools one might use. There are wonderful collections of prayers and spiritual writings that are available for chaplaincy libraries, and you might find in some of those, like one is called Prayers for Healing that I've used for years, and many of those prayers could be adjusted just a little bit to work very well for people who are non-religious. Here's an interesting question. Is chaplain still the best title for what we do? Oh, goodness. I don't know the answer to that question. I have pretty much moved to using spiritual care rather than pastoral care as the more open title, and yet, as I acknowledged, the word spiritual causes an allergic reaction in some people, as does the word chaplain. So I don't know of a perfect name for what we do. Some institutions use very secular names for people who fill functions that in other institutions chaplains would fill, and it sounds like they sound like people who could work in a hotel and be available to find you a good magazine, and that doesn't. I'm too religious to find that very helpful as a name. So I think we're at a time in this country where we're really between uses of language. So I don't know the simple answer, and would be glad to know if other people have come up with interesting options other than chaplain. Are there any reading materials and books on SGTO and spirituality? oodles. So when I started my study, there was very little, and now there are hundreds and hundreds of resources. ACPE is going to put up on the website for open access a series of 3 articles that I co-wrote about the spiritual but not religious, the non-religious, which is where we got the idea for this set of webinars. And you will see that there is some bibliography listed there. Unfortunately, there's very little written yet about spiritual care of these individuals. So most of the writing is more sociological and about who these persons are than how, as chaplains, we might best support them when they're in crisis in our institutions.
Okay, our time has come to an end today. So I want to thank Reverend Teal for today's enlightening presentation and to everybody for joining us. I apologize once again for the technical challenges. We are having severe thunderstorms in Atlanta and part of our internet went out, so we are working on a backup system, so I apologize for that. Several of you have asked about the sharing of the slides and the recording of the webinar. Both will be found on the ACPE Academy webpage early next week. That's located under the resources section on the ACPE website. And also the articles, links to the articles are within that section of the webinars. So within the webinars, all 3 articles are accessible on the ACPE Academy website. So if you've not yet signed up for the future webinars, please do. We hope to see you again soon. Thanks, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Mark.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.